Good evening and good afternoon, depending on where you are in the country. I'm Yvonne Chase, President of NASW, and I want to welcome you to the first Chase Chats. We couldn't think of another name. It's it's an honor to be here, to be with all of you, um, and and to have our first Chase Chats on a topic that I'm very passionate about, and that's self care. As you know, lots of things have changed in the political landscape from since the election, and NASW is extremely concerned about the executive orders that the Trump administration has been issuing. Um, our political landscape has changed only for the worse, it seems. We're responding to a series of those executive orders and rallying social workers to respond as well. We know these times are stressful for social workers, and our society is very divided. That's why I'm happy to have this conversation for social workers to engage with others in positive thinking. What do we do for self care? I often ask who heals the healers. We make referrals for our clients, and we work continually with vulnerable populations. Um, but sometimes we don't really think of ourselves in terms of self care and what we really need to do for that. What does it mean to us? So, thank you for joining us. And I have two exciting guests that I want to get immediately to because both of them have done some tremendous work in this area. So, I'm very happy to introduce them. I want to give you just a brief snippet of what they've done, and then I'll let them take over, tell you a little bit about some of the work that they're doing in self care. And at some point, we will also open up for questions from the audience. So, first, let me introduce Dr. Kristen Lee. She's a renowned behavioral science educator, a best-selling author, and a clinical social worker. She's a behavioral science faculty at Northeastern University, and her research and teaching interests include individual and organizational well-being and resilience, particularly for marginalized and underserved populations. She operates a clinical practice devoted to social impact and health professionals experiencing burnout. She's an award-winning author of many books, and you will see things coming across the screen. She's the author of Clean Slate, How to Make Changes Happen. She also has several other books that she may talk to you a little bit about as she tells you what she's doing with a number of things. One of the things that I was particularly interested in is that she's the host of Cracking Up, where therapy meets comedy, and is a regular contributor to Psychology Today. And I thoroughly believe that we have to have some humor in our lives in order to get through some of the things that occur as we work in the area of social work. Let me move on to our other guest, Nicole Stewart. She has been MSW. She's been a social worker for 2 decades, a strong advocate for youth experiencing homelessness and those caught in the child welfare and juvenile justice system. And having worked in the child welfare and juvenile justice system myself, I know that we see burnout on a regular basis in that system. She has been a rape crisis counselor, a foster parent, and past chair of the Santa Clara County Child Abuse Prevention Council. She's a trauma-informed sound healer, and she's also the author of a new book called Radical Self-Care for Helpers. So I'm interested to hear from both of them. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Chris and ask her to start out.
Yvonne, thank you so much for this warm welcome. And I am just beyond delighted to be with you and Nicole today, and all of our fellow social work colleagues and also related professionals that might be tuning in. As you said, these are harrowing times. And, we see a lot of egregious action happening, that threatens, our whole professional ethos and identity, which is to help humans flourish and to protect the most vulnerable. And so, and I see all of you saying hello, Marlene. We're just really happy to be together, to convene and to be strategic. So I think the classic thing of today that we often think about is when we hear self-care, sometimes I worry that it's a little bit trite or oversimplified, especially in what I might call the TikTokification. Like, is self-care mani-pedis, or is it hashtag lava chocolate cake, right? And so I think there's a lot of popularized sentiment about self-care. But for those of us in the front lines of serving and really, putting our full selves forward, we know it has to be deeper and strategic. But having said that, it doesn't necessarily have to be complicated or like unattainable. So I'm a staunch advocate of, like you said, the times are intense in which we're trying to make sense of things. And so we know when we look at the discoveries of what helps us to stay and do well and to prevent burnout, there's a lot that we can harness. So I'm excited to unpack that today. And I want to just encourage the audience. I really want to emphasize, I don't want to minimize any of the suffering that's at hand and that you're marinating in right now and you're really trying to contend with thoughtfully. But we do know that just as all the stress and, the breaking news and what's going to happen next can haunt us, we know that each of us also can take agency. We can sort of like harness our locus of control and focus on what we can do to prevent ourselves from the ravages of burnout so that we can continue to serve with fervor and with vitality. And so I'm just so happy to talk with you about this and to convene with all of you who are doing this mammoth sacred work. And I'll stop with this. I think that the haunting question that we ask ourselves, unfortunately, is, am I doing enough? And in my writing, I call this underperformance dysmorphic disorder. I use the acronym UD, right? So watch out for UD because it's a huge saboteur of, relishing in how essential our work is and how meaningful and life-changing and impactful it is. So I think we have to watch out for those hauntings that we're not doing enough, because that can really impede our ability to pursue the things that we know help us to stay resilient in the face of this chaos.
Thank you. I'm going to have some questions for you, but first, let me move on to Nicole.
Thank you, Yvonne, and thank you, Chris, for opening up the conversation.
Yeah.
I agree. Feel like we've been saying we're in unprecedented times for the last 6 years at this point. I'm excited for precedented times. We'll see where we get those. But I do want to just make the point that regardless of what is happening out here, our work is really challenging because it's forward facing, it's human facing, it's trauma facing, and we're digesting a lot of content that is traumatic. And we may not see it that way because we're doing the work, we know the work, we love the work, we're good at the work. And the reality is eventually our bodies are going to tell us like, hey, it's a bit much. I come to the work of self-care, radical self-care specifically from my own burnout experience. Being in a state kind of like what Chris said of if I don't do it, it won't get done, and this family or child won't get what they need. And that is a beautiful onus that we take on because we care. And it's not something that we can carry. We can't save everyone. We have to stay in our scope of service, within our scope of control. Scope of control is a big one. I've been reminding myself of that a lot this last week. But what we can control may be limited, especially because our goal is to create agency in those we serve, right? It's not to do for them, it's to do with them and then let them do for themselves. And I think because we come to the work with big hearts open, heartbreak is something that's part of our work. And we don't get to talk about it often because we're busy doing the work. So I just want to acknowledge that. And one of the mantras that I've used as part of my radical self-care is that I can care without carrying. I can care for the young people that I serve. I work in a school district, K-12, in my office now. I usually say I work in a germ factory, which we call a school. Everybody has the flu right now. But what I know is my scope is education. My scope is enrolling kids, making sure our foster kids, our homeless kids, our kids on probation have what they need. I can't create housing. I live in the Bay Area. I can't create housing for my families. I can't create better foster homes for the kids that are in care. What I can do is all I can do in the day based on my scope and my control. And the rest is what I have to work on kind of on my own. And when I say on my own with radical self-care, I don't necessarily mean similar to what Chris said, that anyone else gets off the hook. I think burnout and turnover, which I always say burnout or burnover, those are the purview of our organizations, our agencies, our membership organizations. They are the ones who are responsible for finding out what's going on, why they're having turnover of staff, and fixing those organizational systemic issues. Period. Full stop. And we as individuals are responsible for our own care, whether it's with work or life. And this is kind of where the radical self-care comes in, because we talk a lot about work-life balance. I truly believe that that's nonsense. Our life should be all of it, and our job should be this little part in our full life. And for many of us as helpers, healers, and change makers, we make our career or our profession or our jobs our whole life and maybe our whole identity. And understandably so, because it takes a lot from us. And we are the actor, right? We are the one with the family. We are the one making the referral. We are the one in the shelter. We are the one in the prison. We are the one in the school. So we are the one doing the work. So we take it on a lot. But I really think when we think about our life in a bigger picture and more macro, and that our job is only one aspect of it, then that's when we need to think about radical self-care. So how am I taking care of myself in a larger macro way, to where my work is in a container and I can hop in and hop out and not be affected by the trauma that I might be absorbing in it. So I'm excited to talk a little bit more. I feel like I'm in romper room. I want to say hi, Amanda. Hi, Lisa. Hi, Mary. Hi, Belinda. We're so glad that you all have joined us for this really important conversation. So I'm excited to have a good conversation.
You mentioned limited control, Nicole. And Chris, I wonder if you want to add anything on that. I mean, I think that's one of the things that social workers are feeling now with some of the executive orders, the limited or almost lack of control that we have in terms of being able to help our most vulnerable clients.
It's so harrowing, right? To sort of see the aspects in which we don't have control. And sometimes I use the phrase shocking, not shocking. Like, I feel like that's something I'm constantly repeating on the daily. And, like Nicole said, like, when I think the word unprecedented became very trite, because, and I think it's important too, when we recognize the incredible legacy of the profession, right? And we think about, we're not the first group in the annals of human history to suffer dramatically and to face, horrendous injustice and egregious behavior, right? And so I think we have to step back and again, look at, I love the framework of locus of control as well, right? And focusing on what is and not what ifing ourselves. What if, this next thing happens tomorrow, or, it doesn't mean we just zone out and we're not prepared, but we have to focus on what we can take action on. And I think that's one of the reasons, I'm so proud as an NASW member, and hi from Missouri. Hello. It's so awesome. Hi, Cher. Awesome. So, I think we do have to, I'm so excited to see you all. This is because we are a community, but again, this whole notion, this whole theme of compassion and action, that completely, like, I just got so excited when I saw that emerge. And I think one of the reasons I get nerdy about like the latest research and kind of like, you know, what the discussion is around compassion. Now, we all know, we've heard of compassion fatigue. We all know about vicarious trauma. But some new studies coming out of Oxford are actually indicating that compassion is a protective factor. Right. And so we know that from the work we do. We know that as we show up, you know, and we're activating that compassion, that it is protective. But the key, the caveat or the nuance is that when we over-identify with those we're serving, or we're, you know, just like ruminating or perseverating over things, that is when we can sort of like get into that mental avalanche. So I think we have to just be mindful and pay attention to our responses and recognize, yes, we do have these severe risks of burnout, but there are things that we can do to help mitigate the risk of it and that we can take control around. And so, and Nicole, I have to say too, like, just your candor, you know, I think all of us come into this work with our own lived experiences of all different, you know, sorts. And, you know, I really started to specialize in burnout. I even like, so I'm celebrating my 25-year graduation from MSW this year, which is wild, right?
Oh, you're only 13, right?
It's like wild, right? But it's like, it's always been a thing. Like burnout has always been a thing. It was the first, it's why I wanted to study it and help prevent it and help treat it. It's why I'm here tonight and today, right? It's like, it's such an occupational risk. And even in 2019, the World Health Organization reclassified burnout for the general population as a modern risk and a condition of the modern workplace. And then, of course, social workers and helpers and healers and change makers, I love how you said that, we are at a disproportionate risk. So a construction worker wouldn't turn up to the job site without goggles and a hard hat and steel-toed boots. So why are we just like, you know, we have the curse of knowledge. We think, well, we know self-care, we live and breathe it, we teach it. And then we're like, tomorrow. And that's where, you know, that cumulative effect can, you know, it's not pretty. You know, we don't want to make light of that. I mean, it's just, so I think, you know, this is all to say that there's a lot we need to tune out and there's a lot we need to pay attention to.
So if you had two things that you could mention to cut down on stress, what would they be?
Win the lottery. And I think, I don't know that we can cut down on stress. I think it's, you know, obviously it's more about how we digest it or how we process it. And maybe what we see as stress in the first place. So radical self-care for me is inside out. It's what do I have, what do I have with me that I don't have to pay for, I don't have to add on, I don't have to buy, that I can use in that space. And breath, of course, is the first thing that comes to mind. And whenever I tell somebody, you know, taking a deep breath might be a good idea, or, you know, let's take a deep breath together. I know whenever someone tells you to take a deep breath, you want to slap them in the face, right? I get it. And have you tried it? Because it's powerful. I think focusing on our breath, and some of it is mindfulness, right? Being aware of how we're feeling in the moment and giving ourselves permission to take a break, take a breath, take a moment to think about how we want to respond, right? Which is mindfulness. Taking in what is, and then being able to respond from a place of calm. Mm-hmm. That is really powerful because stress is going to come. That is the nature of our jobs. People don't come to us on their best day. They come to us when they're challenged. Mm-hmm. I jokingly say, you know, I eat stress for breakfast, but I make sure that it's my energy for the rest of the day. So I would say using the breath, and don't sleep on the breath. It's powerful. I've done breath work with folks in prison in San Quentin. I've done work with people, you know, with different intense traumas, and the power of breath is not a small thing, and it's not something to poo-poo. The second thing I would say is having a community period. Whether that's peers in the social work community or those outside of. I think it's good to have a combination, right? Because those inside will validate what you're going through and what you're feeling. And those outside might be like, girl, what are you doing? Or like, why do you do that? So they kind of give you a good perspective of like, that's wild that you are responsible for that in your job, or that's crazy that you have to hold all this. So pulling into your community it's part of radical self-care. I say radical self-care doesn't have to be solo, but it has to be self-initiated. So focusing on the breath and truly allowing yourself to just take a beat. And then having your community that you can kind of, whether it's a meetup every now and then, a phone call, a Zoom, something like that. So those would be the two things I would suggest.
Okay. Chris, you have anything to add?
I do. I love what you just shared. I'll say therapy. And again, I think this is like, we can get lots of tripwires in our own mind's eye, right? And then we think, I think we've come a long way with, stigma or shame or trepidation. I think we're very good at giving help, and we have to learn how to ask for help when we need it. I think it's a really important skill that we all need, when we can cry uncle and we can lean into someone we trust and that can help us strategize on our own burnout prevention. And I want to just color that in, taking Nicole's lead. I really like your candor. Through the past few years, I've always been a person with a lived experience of anxiety and depression. And through the last few years where we've been marinating in so much trauma, it really became clear to me, like, that even just my general therapy, I needed more, like, and I'm one of those people, like, I've got like, the Apple Watch, and I'm trying to do like overdo the self-care, right? And I didn't find that the things that historically had worked for me were really helping me to recalibrate and to be okay, right? And so I knew I wasn't okay. I knew I needed to reach out. And so not only did I engage in more therapy, but I also, and this isn't to like say this is a one size fits all for anyone, because we all have different variables and circumstances. But I ended up going on an SSRI. I went on some medication for what they told me was for PTSD and anxiety. I was dealing with some pretty harrowing circumstances. At the time too, I was living on my university campus. I lived on my campus for 3 years, serving as a faculty in residence on the front lines, helping students through very challenging moments. I was very immersed. Again, there was no work-life balance, right? And I just knew I needed more help. And that really, I'm so grateful that I did that. And then the second thing that I did that's sort of like very different than the serious thing I've shared, and Yvonne, you picked up on this too, is during kind of these these horrible moments, I started a comedy mental health show. And it's to benefit mental health access. So it supports the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and then a Coma project, which focuses on BIPOC mental health access. And I thought it was probably like one of the most absurd things I did in some ways, because it was such a dark and heavy time. But it's so true that we need that levity. And it was a way to tell our lived experiences and the stories that we're all terrified. And even like, I'm like super into art too, and performing arts, all art. So I'm obsessed with Georgia O'Keeffe. And she said I've been absolutely terrified every moment of my life, but I've never let it stop me from doing a single thing I wanted to do. So I always share that at the show. And then we do monologues and all kinds of hilarity. And it really brought people together. And at first I thought, like, is everyone going to think I'm a weirdo, or is this even appropriate? Or, am I going to end up being a super spreader? Like it was once it was safe to do so. But it kind of, in Clean Slate, I wrote a whole chapter about this and about my medication and my therapy journey. But I'm like, not all issues need tissues, right? And laughter is so restorative. And maybe like, I wonder if anyone, when they were getting their MSW, if you guys saw Strong at the Broken Places, that film, like,
yes.
And I remember one of the stories was like, he's like, we were amputees and we were like so severely traumatized, but we did not miss laughing on Saturday nights. Like we watched it religiously. So I think that is the piece, like when, like we're dealing with such grave circumstances, we might feel like very guilty to laugh or like be silly or be playful or let ourselves go a little bit. And I think that's a mistake. And one that, again, I've lived and breathed. And I think, art in general, you might be like, well, I don't want to do stand-up comedy, but there's other like things I can play with. So I would encourage that. And then I'll end with someone who inspires me, a comedian, two comedians that inspire me. One is Miss Pat. And she, I read her book called Rabbit, and I saw her perform in Boston and talk about like a level of trauma, horrendous trauma. And then a social worker actually prompted her to perform. And it's her story is incredible. And then another comedian is Maria Bamford. I think everyone should binge her stuff. She has a lived experience of OCD and bipolar, and she is hilarious. So listen to this. We have over 200 of you watching live right now. And then I think I just saw a question flash, and I know I missed it. So I will stop there. But just to recap, therapy and laughter, really both on ends of the spectrum, right? In terms of serious, silly, but we need that integration in our lives in order to, be able to reframe and to be able to cope. And I did an NASW professional development on humor. I wrote like a whole white paper about it. It's like, I was laughing at myself. I'm like, this is so serious. But it's important, I love research too, so.
Well, I would ditto on the laughter. And the other thing I would add is I often look at everything I have to do and decide what do I want to put my energy in that I can actually see a change. And there's some things that I know I can't. So am I wasting energy on that and just getting frustrated over it?
Love it.
And it is exciting. I see a number of people that I know on there. Hello from Puerto Rico, and I see somebody from Baltimore. And we have some questions. You saw a question coming across?
I did. I just can't see it now because it was very fast. I think it was from D.
Let's see if we can get Dee's question back.
It was how should social workers deal with a toxic supervisor? But I know there were some other questions before that. So I don't know if we're, oh yeah, there it is. It's on the screen here.
All right.
Do you want to take a stab, Nicole?
Sure. I've had to deal with this myself. And that was one of the things that almost drove me to, well, that was one of the things that gave me shingles. And that's when I realized I will no longer allow anyone or any job to compromise my health. And that's, again, why I started writing this book, because ultimately, again, what can you change? What is your sphere of influence? I'm in a position where I'm the only social worker in my district, and that emboldens me. Like, I almost dare them to fire me on a daily basis. And they know who I am. I'm an advocate. I'm gonna advocate. So for me, I went directly to HR. First of all, I documented what was occurring in very concise language. Not I feel or I think, but this date, this time, this happened. I mean, I was being moved office to office. I was put in a storage closet as one of my offices. I was being told the wrong time for meetings and showing up late and then being, tissed at. I was snapped at in meetings. It was horrible, but I documented everything. I found people who witnessed certain things, and I had them document it in the moment. So I said, hey, can you write up just a few sentences about what you witnessed in that meeting? And I have it in a folder. Then I went to HR and presented what I had. I also called my union rep and presented what I had with them. The union provided me with an attorney, with legal advice, I will say, not an attorney, but legal advice, which wasn't necessarily helpful. It was kind of like, well, they almost have to do this to you before we can do anything. But I just pushed on it. And anytime, I work in a school district, so we would like to have courageous conversations. So anytime a courageous conversation would come up in a management meeting or a meeting I was in, guess what I was going to talk about? I want to recognize not everyone feels safe enough in their work to do that. But that's why I said document what you've got, because that's what's going to hold on to you. Because if they try to fire you, it's retaliation, and you can't go back and say, well, they did this last year, or they just did this last week, if you don't already have it documented. So I would say that. And then again, your radical self-care has nothing to do with your supervisor, nothing to do with where you work. if you have to survive that job. And it might mean one of your radical self-care practices might be quitting that job and finding a different one. I know that's not always possible. That's a privilege. So I want to acknowledge that. But there is no job that I will allow to kill me, straight up.
Chris, anything to add on that?
And I think, I saw Jasmine say documentation is key. And I think you're really underscoring the need for boundaries and self-advocacy, right? And like you said, protecting, when you use the word radical self-care, I love it because I think that's such a stellar example, right? Like you cannot let something compromise your health and well-being. And that's, I think, a great travesty. And one thing I try to think of like, okay, we're a tough audience sometimes as social workers because again, like, we approach this work as with so much passion and there's so many needs at hand. And I think we can skip over our own knowledge and advice. But I think one hook for us is that when we're disparaged or when we are at this disproportionate risk of burnout, that's a social justice issue. So this isn't just like you talked about macro before, Nicole. I think it's really important to focus on that too. It's like, yeah, there's things we can do. Like some of us might currently have a toxic supervisor or we will in a year, right? But we have to look at this, I think, from this macro level and recognize that we are being set up to be at this particular risk because of, and at this present moment within the context of the administration, things are being the safety nets are ripped away. I mean, we're just seeing this escalation, and we already knew that by 2030, the global the critical shortage of mental health workers was predicted to crest. So this was before the pandemic, before all these executive orders and all the carnage we're seeing. And so we were already at a particular risk. So I think I want to sort of plead with any of you that say, I'll do it when I get through this deadline, or I'll do, it's a whack-a-mole game. We all know it. The minute we, figure one piece out, something else is going to pop up. So today, tonight, pinky promise yourself that you're going to do something a little bit different, whether it's just giving yourself permission to stop saying, Yvonne, that was so poignant. We're not going to fix everything. What do we invest our energy into? What's our return on investment? Did you guys hear my Boston accent just now?
Yeah, a bit.
But I think it's just so key is recognizing it as a social justice issue. And same for our fellow, for teachers and our dear interdisciplinary colleagues out there. And I think if we reframe it that way, because we're good reframers too, right? We're all about social justice. We're all about reframing. Maybe we have to recognize that it's not just our own microcosm, but this is a social justice issue. So when that toxic inner critic wants to haunt you, or the underperformance dysmorphic disorder wants to come in and rent space in your head, or you want to be perfectionistic or feel like you're not good enough, or you're imposter syndroming, is that a verb? I don't know, but let's say it is. Then we have to watch out for it, right? And so look at this, Aaliyah's saying, bubble bath tonight. Yes. So again, I think we just have to really reimagine this as a much bigger issue so that we don't end up taking it on ourselves, right? Because that is so counter. And I think that's the travesty. How are the people who do the most so hard on themselves? And then I'll end with saying too, I think just because you put others first doesn't mean you have to put yourself last.
Good for you, Karina. I see after 7 years, you decided to
get rid of a supervisor. That's great.
To get rid of a supervisor.
Yay, Karina.
Yeah.
Outlasted. And I hope you're whole. I also, and I think I see a comment from Melanie saying she also got shingles. I see you, Melanie. That her emotions range from utter despair to wanting to incite a riot. And that is where we are. And that will impact our health, right? Doing that zip from all the time, right? That's a fight or flight response. Our nervous system's in that state of panic. Our amygdala is being triggered. that's going to impact how we do our work, how we are in relationship, how we show up for everything we do. So that's also, my trauma response is a freeze response. So as these things started happening at the beginning of the year, I kind of was in a stuck space of like, what's happening? Now I've kind of thought out and I'm in a space of like, all right, we got work to do. And I think that's where we can also be as, again, when there are precedented times, at some point, we will still be doing trauma facing, forward facing, people facing work. So, and I've been in organizations where I have phenomenal supervisor. I have amazing supervision. I'm being paid well. I have amazing coworkers. My caseload's fine. And still I need my radical self-care because the work we do is so heavy, even when things are good in an organizational way. So that's what I mean. Like the organizational piece is one thing. The way I see radical self-care is that it's what helps us be able to say to the organization, this isn't working for me, or no, I won't do that, because no is a complete sentence. You don't have to justify yourself. So I think that's the other picture to think about, is like who we are within our organization, but also the bigger picture of who we are, not attached to our worth or our output in a profession.
And one of the things that we need to remember is that the executive orders and things that are occurring now are in some ways icing on the cake. It's not a good cake, mind you, but we've been doing this work forever. And all of these other stressors have always been there. So it's not just dealing with what's new on the horizon, but really looking at the bigger picture, as you said, Nicole.
And I do see some people saying they might have to leave their work, or they've been contemplating leaving social work. What I would say is, I kind of feel once a social worker, always a social worker. So good luck running away from being a social worker. But the beauty of social work is that our skills are highly transferable. I think everyone should be a social worker and then do whatever else they want to do, quite frankly. But we have skills, whether we're a micro or macro or meso social worker, that are transferable to other industries. I think helpers, healers, and change makers are the most brilliant people. And we choose to help other people because we recognize we could do any of those other professions. Maybe I'm a little biased, but that said, like, take your skills elsewhere if that's what you want. But also remember that social work is a very big world. So as you heard in my bio, I started in rape crisis domestic violence work, and that got overwhelming for me because of my own trauma that I wasn't fully aware of. And I kind of talk about that in the book. And then I moved to California from Connecticut, and then I was like, oh, I'll go somewhere where there's less trauma. I'll go into schools. Joke's on me, there's plenty of trauma in schools, but I shifted from being a rape crisis counselor to being a school social worker. Maybe in the next 5 years, I'll shift to being a hospital social worker, or maybe I'll become, maybe I'll work with elders instead of teenagers. I think social work is a very wide world. So if the one place that you're in social work, like if you're in child welfare and you're like, this is not it, like these kids are driving me nuts, with all due respect and love of them, of course, maybe you want to work with elders. And if you're working with elders and you're like, this is a little slower for me, I'd rather have fast pace, or I'd rather have a different vibe. Maybe you want to work with veterans. Maybe you want to work with people in the court system, like a forensic social worker. The beauty of social work is that it's a wide world and our skills are amazing and transferable. So don't slip on yourself.
I often tell my students I still haven't figured out what I want to be when I grow up. So I just, I've worked in child protection, in juvenile justice. I've worked in mental health. And I've worked in the schools and in different parts of the country, which also have some really different vibes in terms of the kinds of things that are occurring. So I would thoroughly agree with you. The specialties are numerous, and you can always change. And sometimes, that's a good thing. I have a colleague who's been in child protection, is now an administrator, has been in the child protection area for about 20 years. And one of the things he said that has kept him there is that he didn't stay in the same place. He worked in foster care, then he worked in adoptions, then he worked in someplace else, and then he went into administration. And so while he stayed with the same larger system, he's had a different focus and less stress in some of those areas.
Mhm.
And I do want to honor, Chris, your vulnerability and sharing with us your therapy journey and the fact that you are on medication. And I recognize that for those of us, Yvonne, to your point of like, we're the ones referring people, but we don't often
That's right.
avail ourselves of it. And some of that is the stigma. And again, this is where the organizations are responsible for turnover and burnout, because they'll tell you to get help. And then when you do, there's a stigma around it. Like, oh, well, if you needed mental health, maybe you shouldn't be a counselor, or maybe social work isn't for you. I know many social workers who've been 5150'd or who have voluntarily checked themselves into a psychiatric facility because of their level of PTSD. And I am so proud of that bravery, because I think it takes courage to do. But that's where we have to push back on our organizations to say, no, this is a great thing. If you have staff that are seeking support, please encourage them, don't discourage them. But that means some policies may have to change around personal days, or being able to do telehealth and have the time off and not have to take vacation time. Like, we have to, the organizations have to create the space for us to be able to do our radical self-care.
I love that. It makes me think too, like I love Rihanna, and she has a line in her song, one of her songs, she says, all of my kindness was taken for weakness. And it makes me think a lot about social workers as a whole, is that sometimes people, and again, like we're dynamic and we're highly skilled, and oftentimes we're very contained and articulate, and, we're doing all this emotional labor, and, everyone thinks we're fine, right? And then it doesn't, we still have human brains, and we're subject to all kinds of things in these brains of ours that are under a lot of stress and doing a lot of labor. And so I think, it just behooves us to be able to look at that carefully and then think accordingly. One thing that also helped me, I am a reader. I love to read. I love to write. It's very therapeutic. Nicole knows, like, writing our stories and writing the things we've learned and making those contributions. It's a wonderful thing. But I was into, like, thinking about, sometimes people will say, well, how do I know when I'm burnt out? Or how do I know if it's burnout or depression or anxiety spectrum? And I'm like, well, it's kind of like, it's not really a Venn diagram, but it's like, I don't know if we need to, like, split hairs over what's what. But I think when we are experiencing disruptions and, clinically significant things, we have to look at it. And so there's a couple of things. Like, I had read a bunch of the researcher Doris Santoro's work, and she talked about the difference between burnout and demoralization. And she distinguished demoralization as when we know that we have the solutions for things, and I'm paraphrasing, but it's when the red tape is all wrapped up and we can't do what we know. And so when I think of, like, let's say, like, for example, law enforcement reform, and we take a case example in Oregon, how they brought a lot of social workers, and then they were able to use their, speaking of skills, right, to diffuse situations and actually intervene properly with the community and be trauma informed. And, like, the outcomes were incredible. The human outcomes and the fiscal outcomes were incredible. And I think, like, if you're like, well, what would be, like, your one thing, Chris, like, in terms of, like, what would you, kind of want your, like, last statement in life to be, or your summative statement as a social worker? It's like, my biggest pain point is we have so many solutions on the major problems that are polarizing, that haunt people, that impede people. And yet we don't have the moral will or the critical thinking to get out of our own way and fix it. And I know that's, like, a gross oversimplification, but it's like, and we know, like, when you, like, I'm hype about social work, but it's like MSW is like an MBA, like, it's versatile, but there's so much we can bring. We bring the person and environment perspective. We bring social justice. We bring a strengths-based perspective, solution-focused. And so I think we have to be really proud of our compassion and action, right? And how we harness that, and how we do take pride in that, to help mitigate these risks of demoralization, and to be creative, right? The other little, like, thing that helped me too, when I was, like, just thinking about burnout, we all know it's emotional exhaustion. We all know it's depersonalization, feeling more like a human doing than a human being. But it's also can be understimulation. And I think this is a really, like, fun fact about burnout. So sometimes we can just be so burnt because our creativity isn't activated or our talents aren't being harnessed, and no one wants to listen to the actual expertise we have, or no one's like looking at things with a critical thinking lens, and you're just like, this is ridiculous. So I think just recognizing when we're underwhelmed and we're understimulated, how can we activate creativity or these values in our lives in other facets? So, or what do we renegotiate? And so I just want to encourage everyone to know that too. Sometimes burnout isn't overwhelm, it's underwhelm. And I think that doesn't get talked about enough, but it's a thing. There's a there.
Absolutely. Especially because we are very comfortable in chaos. We're very comfortable with, I am calm in the storm. If we had an intruder drill today on our campus and I'm, if someone comes on campus, they better hope I'm not here. Please don't. But truly, like, we're used to that, right? We're used to the pace of things. So then that's what the pandemic showed us, right? When things quiet down and we have to be still, oh my gosh, it's so uncomfortable. And that's actually an intervention I sometimes do when I hear about a kid who's having behavioral challenges in the classroom. My first question is, are they bored? Mm-hmm. Right? Maybe there's not enough stimulation. So I appreciate that. And I just want to call out, Thomas put, no way, I'm a civil servant and I'm standing my ground. I'm not going anywhere. And that's why I wrote this book. Like, radical self-care. I did not accidentally use the word radical. I used it because some of us, those of us who feel safe enough to do so and are privileged enough to do so, we need to be the ones who stand there. And someone else asked a question about dealing with our LGBTQI clients. Yeah. We need to be the ones that stand in front of them. I do not mince words, and I will not hesitate to support my trans kids on my campus. However I have to do that. If I have to use different words, maybe I don't use DEI, maybe I don't use LGBTQI, maybe, we have code words between each other, whatever that looks like. I won't blink. So, and I know there are some of us who are veterans who feel that way. We also have some newer social workers or people who are new to this work who may not feel that safe. They may not be in a position where, they could lose their job and still maintain what they need to do or whatever that looks like. For me, one of my radical self-care practices, after getting out of credit card debt, because I was trying to do my, treat yourself self-care, right? I retail therapied and comfort fooded myself into credit card debt. But one of my radical self-care practices was to get myself out of debt and have savings. I have savings so that, there will be no profession or no supervisor that compromises my well-being. And the minute that happens, I know, because I've worked on it, and I'm in my 40s, y'all, so I've had time, but I know I have a fallback. I know I have options because I've purposely created an escape route for myself, because I want to be able to do what Thomas said. I'm here and I'm going to stand in front of whatever's coming at my clients, my students, my families. And that's in any administration, and because of the work that we do. So I just want to acknowledge that. Thank you, Thomas. We appreciate the work you're doing.
Yeah, I think it's remembering that we are the experts, as you both have said, in navigating the systems, and we need to do it for ourselves as well as for our clients.
And if I could just give a little bit of hope, there's a lot going on right now, and that's very purposeful. And the purpose of it is to get us dysregulated and to keep us in that state so that we can't act and we can't organize and we can't come together. Division is also a tactic of this, right? They want us to be on different sides. And if we're paying attention by now, we know it's not about blue and red. It's not about black and white. It's not about left and right. It's about, the owning class and the rest of us. And the rest of us is everybody. And we are not very dissimilar to our clients, right? Like, those we serve are us, we are they, them. So I want to encourage people to, again, take a deep breath, hold the stillness, remember what your role and your control is, and work hard in that paint. Like, get to know your neighbors, get to know your peers. If you don't have, I'm the only social worker here, but I coordinate and network with social workers at other school districts and in other county spaces because I need my peers. So I would really encourage you, because I think what's happening right now is going to give us a beautiful opportunity to change the systems that we actually that we constantly say we want to change, because they're falling away and they're being dismantled. So we have the ability, maybe not right now, maybe in the next few years, to reimagine what these systems could look like. It's going to take work. It's going to be a little uncomfortable, That doesn't mean we don't rest. That doesn't mean we don't take care of ourselves or each other. But I just want to appreciate that that's the case, you know. And I see, Amanda, thank you for your comment. It's not about having code words so that we're not saying what needs to be said. It's about keeping our people safe. So I have students who they tell me to call them a certain name when other adults are around versus when they're in a safe place. So that's more what I meant. Not that we are not honoring how they are seen and how they want to come with us. So I thank you for that clarification.
I think we also have to realize that, you know, out of chaos comes creativity. You know, we can think out of the box and come up with some new ways to deal with self-care, but also in new ways to help our clients out there who are having some different challenges right now. And again, I see Michael saying using humor as a form of self-care. I definitely believe in that as well. And music, you mentioned that a little bit, Chris. But, you know, if I get into one of my moods, then I have to, you know, put on Nina Simone or something that says I did it my way, you know, and sort of remember, you know, you got it. You got this. You have to tell yourself that once in a while.
Absolutely.
I love it. I love it. It's so beautiful, these contributions. And I saw Michael was reflecting on humor and wondered, how do you make sure it's not offensive or punching down or dismissive? And I think that's a really good question because, you know, it doesn't mean just, you know, just it should be used in every context or situation. We have to be very mindful. One way I practice it, you know, I've mentioned the performance aspect, but I also like, you know, I like to watch different comedians. And then I think it's just once you have, you know, trusting relationships and you think strategically, you know, humor should never punch down. I don't even like roast. Like, I'm not a fan of comedy roast at all. Like, I'm always sweating and like, I could never roast. I'd feel so bad. So I think it's true. Like, I think just it doesn't even have to be stand up, but playfulness and silliness and creating awe and gratitude, all those things are connected that we see really helping us flourish even through challenging times. Now, having said that, it should never, I think, again, minimize the gravity. So I saw one of you even put up a poop emoji, like it's an S show right now. One of you said, what about our migrant families? We need to fight hard. And that's the whole point, is we need to find this wellspring of resources that we can shore up, that we can leverage, that we can activate. And that's even why I wrote Clean Slate. You know, it's based on this, I talk about the clean slate mindset and the fresh start effect, and how every day is a new start over and every afternoon is different from the morning. So there's a lot we can activate, a lot of discoveries and creative means that can help us, because, you know, the actual work and the actual carnage and suffering is just horrific. And so I think, you know, we have to activate any of these aspects that can help us sustain ourselves through it.
We're
There was
close to running out of time, so I'm going to ask you each couple more things that you really want to say. Nicole.
I was just going to kind of mention the piece about our refugee and our immigrant families, because again, I think it's about standing our ground, educating them about their rights, and knowing what you will, like, having a game plan. Luckily, I'm in California. My school district, my board, my superintendent have all made statements. They made them like the very week that things were happening. And we have been getting Know Your Rights workshops and things like that. So we have our red cards. We have our work with our staff. And we've been told what we can and cannot do. And I know there are people who will do above and beyond that because we care about our families. So I think what I just want to close about is just to say, we are in a profession that I think is so phenomenal. I know that social work, I know this sounds trite, but I think social work will save the world. And it's not because we're amazing and we know better than anyone else, but again, it's because our job is to get at the root. Our job is to encourage communities and encourage the agency of those we serve. And I think that makes us radical, and that might make us a little dangerous right now, right? Because we're going to empower communities to speak up and speak out. I would encourage you all to try to find those things that keep you buoyed in this work. Find ways that help you stay supported in this work, and that help you stay resourced in this work. And I have specific examples certainly in my book that we can't get to right now, but I encourage you all to be brave, be courageous, stay regulated, and stay connected. I think that's where I'll end.
All right. Chris.
I'm just I mean, that's so lovely. And I think sometimes we wish we could toss our phones into the woods and take a 6-month sabbatical or go analog but I would encourage just micro strategies, tiny things add up. So you might not be able to just leave your job immediately or even want to, but just thinking of the cumulative effect of the stressors, make sure you chip away, you take a break rituals approach to your work. Like Nicole said, just the breath work, like there's so many things that we can do that won't cost us extra time and money, but that are really essential to keep us, compassionate and action oriented at this time that, we really need to draw upon that for ourselves and for those we serve. I also want to say, can we come on the podcast with you again? You are so awesome, Yvonne. And Nicole, this was so wonderful. And
We'll have to do this again.
You all come back exactly again like this because
I think we should.
Amazing.
About 4 hours.
Yes, we need longer period of time. Well, it's difficult to sum up everything, and I've been reading the things going across on the questions as well as comments as well. But I don't think that's an underestimate, Nicole, that we can save the world. We're going to have to do it bit by bit, but we really are the voice that has to be there for the global community to listen. Mm-hmm. And it's really a global community. I mean, we see some of the issues that are happening, not just in this country, but around the world. We've got a lot of work to do, but stay with your laughter, relax, enjoy music, and remember we can do so much and then we can do it again the next day. So we've got 3 minutes, I think. Any last minute burst of energy thought?
I would just say join a union if you can. Collective action is what we need right now. That's what will save your heart and minimize the amount of work that you alone have to do when we do it in coordination and together. If you can't be part of a union, like if you're a manager or something like that, find your people. Find your people. We're out here. I'm going to try to do some community things in the Bay Area, but also some things online so people can connect with us online and also just having this discussion. This is a really powerful discussion. I hope people have it in supervision. I hope they have it in their MSW and BSW programs. Mm-hmm. The more we talk about this, the more I think we spread the word and folks can, then we got to take the stigma out. Mm-hmm. It shouldn't, at some point we won't have to have this conversation because it'll be such a common thing. And that's my hope.
Mm-hmm. Well said. I also want to just shout out to anyone who's working like primarily virtually, or maybe just not getting enough time in community to try to prioritize that. And I also want to just give a shout out to NASW Massachusetts. This week we lobbied together. Nice. And that was so meaningful. We had like Love Your Social Workers Day and we were lobbying for 2 bills together. And I hadn't lobbied in a little bit of time. And so it was just so wonderful to come together and connect with other social workers and, do something. So speaking of compassion and action, right? And that really helped a ton. I loved every minute. And so I would just encourage that because I know that piece of some of us are working virtually or just not getting enough like meaningful time to recharge our social batteries. So I would encourage that too.
You made an interesting point about working remotely, and I do quite a bit of that. And one of the things that I have found is that I work more hours. I forget about breaks. So you also have to think about being good to yourself there. Because if I were at my office in the university, I'd probably take a break between meetings because I'd have to walk someplace else.
That's right.
So, yeah.
I'm in the same boat. And so sometimes I'll take my walk as if it was the commute, right? So you can do a lot of creative things and like try to set some of those boundaries around the time you would have had otherwise, because otherwise it can just swallow you whole.
Yeah. And I would encourage open and close. So when you open your office door, wherever it is you sit down, maybe light a candle, maybe have a drink, and then appropriate drink for the day. And then when you leave, you close, turn things off, close the door, like create some kind of separation. Cause it's easy for us to overwork when where there's no physical separation.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
But thank
Absolutely.
you.
Thank you all. We thoroughly enjoyed our time with you.
Absolutely.
And we hope you did too.
What a delight.